Hey there, Dungeon Acid. Um, Talking today about aspects of a dungeon and dungeons that are theater of the mind. I have some Fresca here. I have a frog. Later, we'll see what's inside the frog. Um, so, theater of the mind play was something I had first resisted in my D&D career, but have grown to very much love. In our current worldwide situation, it is uh, I think an easier way to play virtually is with Theater of the Mind. Now, of course, there are tons of apps that lay out and show a battle grid online, but I really feel that Theater of the Mind uh, has a sense of epic scale and pulpy action, fast paced action that really you can't replicate very well with uh, miniatures on the tabletop, um, which of course have their own benefits, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. But yeah, Theater of the Mind, and what dungeons are like in Theater of the Mind, because that is really the meat of where you would where you would map things out and put a map down and have miniatures and do all that walking out, because really people do Theater of the Mind all the time if they play with miniatures. It's just that they only bring out the miniatures for the battles and for the dungeons. So, how do you do dungeons in Theater of the Mind? Well, to my mind, the best way, really the only way, should be, you have to think of scenes. You have to think of as if you're watching a movie. How would you describe this? So, to say that, let's say there's a dungeon with a room, and then it breaks off, and there's a long passageway that goes down because it's a grand dungeon underneath a mountain. Say this passageway goes for 100 feet that direction into a different room. Well, you can describe that traversing the 100 feet very cinematically, instead of just saying, yeah, you walk straight forward for 100 feet that way. If you speak and if you describe things with schematics and measurements and those kind of mathematic descriptors for Theater of the Mind, you're not going to have a fun time. It's not going to be very cinematic because it's literally just like playing tabletop or playing with miniatures without the miniatures. You're like, well, just imagine that it goes 100 feet in this way and it goes to a room that's 40 foot by 80 foot and then it's 30 foot tall and it has this at 20 feet inward. There's an altar that's 10 foot by 10 foot. That is just, people are going to zone out and then they're going to be confused about the layout of the dungeon. Far more interesting is to describe the flicker of your torch, cast eerie shadows on the cobblestone dungeon wall as your party progresses down this hallway. The darkness ahead of you, a mystery, and with each step, you feel like there should be a turn left or right coming up at any point, yet keeps going, forward, onward for what seems like ages. Your will, your nerve begins to shake as you're, looking around, checking for traps, making sure that this place is safe, and finally it opens up into a cavernous room with a massive stone altar at its center, and upon the altar, blah blah blah, monsters or prisoners or whatever you're going to have in your dungeon. So that last description, that's far more evocative than saying, oh, it's a 100-foot hallway you go down and then you come to a 40 foot by 80 room with 30 foot high ceiling and 20 foot in you get an altar. And if they want to interact with it, they can always pause your description and say, wait, I do this, or I look at this, or what's that look like? And that's welcome. That should be welcomed. This is not you just reading off adjectives to them. It's you're trying to evoke a feeling, and they can pop in at any point to activate and interact, right? The other thing that's important to know with building dungeons for Theater of the Mind is what kind of things you build your scenes around. And to my mind, there's a kind of short list. Okay, the first one is clue. Clues are usually non-combat encounters, although could be a combat encounter, that will increase the mystery the tension, but also give them a bit of evidence. So it's a bit of a carrot on a string. Say they've entered this dungeon because they heard of a tale of a mad alchemist who's been performing horrid experiments on people. What type? They don't know. That's a mystery, right? Well, a clue room would be a room where they are confronted with evidence that answers some of their questions and then poses more questions that develops the story further. So for that alchemist example, let's see, it could be they find the disease-riddled body of a former experiment, discarded and thrown off to the side, or they could find jars of dissected organs. They could find scrawled notes and journals on a desk that detail the mad notes of this alchemist and what he's doing and results, but it could be through the lens of like, oh, test result 48, won't stop screaming. I've injected him with blah, blah, blah. So that can be all very evocative, and a clue should perpetuate and keep the players wanting to investigate further, because it answers some questions, but it poses more. Next up is enemy. Enemy is your most common. Maybe not most common in terms of you have more of them in your dungeon than the others, but most common, and that's the thing that gets the most focus in Dungeons and Dragons, and that's of course fighting, combat, creatures, monsters, right? What's the encounter? Who are you fighting? Enemies, that's pretty self-explanatory, but there should always be a little extra sauce, a little extra special ingredient besides just a room with a monster. For instance, some easy ones are a moral quandary of how you interact, right? So let's say there's an enemy that the party has from before, and that they knew was going to be down in the dungeon, or that had said they were interested in going to the dungeon. When the party comes across this room, the monsters haven't noticed the party yet, but the players notice that the monsters have this person cornered and are about to kill him, have this enemy. Does the party intervene because they are, they don't want this person to come to harm, even though they're an enemy of the party or weren't friendly the last time? Or do they not want to give away their position and they let the monsters slay that person? It's a moral quandary, but it's still an enemy encounter because there are monsters here. Another good one is a monster in a cage. Let's say it's an owlbear. An enraged owlbear stuck in this cage that they come across. Do they leave it in there? If it's being, owlbears are just creatures, they're animals. So that's animal abuse for this. Whoever put this owlbear in this small cage and is not, taking care of it and not letting it roam free. So what do they do that? Do you let the owlbear go? Good chance it'll attack you. Do you try and figure out a way so you can remotely open the cage and then run out of the room? So moral quandaries are good sauce you can add into those enemy counters, but there's really just go nuts with your creativity, because you can make so many different creative enemy encounters. So we have clues, we have enemies, we also have traps. Traps, also self-explanatory, probably second most attention given by the D&D rules. And that is, you're going to be making skill checks of some kind usually, some sort of dice roll. If you're going old school, you might just do it all via description. But traps will have some sort of environmental hazard that the characters must traverse. So a room with traps can often provide a high risk, but a high reward as well. And that is what makes someone go through the trap. Oftentimes, a boring trap is one where it's just there to trick the players, and if they make their roll, if they spot the trap, they disarm it, they go about their way. Not very cool. But you add that little extra sauce where they find that it looks like a passage leading to a treasure chest, but there's secretly a trap in front of it. Well, this gives them an incentive to go down there. They might fall for it and be too enthused and be run toward the treasure chest, or even if they spot the trap and decide they would rather not tangle with it, they still have the treasure as an incentive to go tangle with it. And another kind of interesting sauce you could add in for traps is mix it together with clues and uh, uh, stuff we've talked about before. So, for instance, a pit trap, but down at the pit bottom there's a dead body clutching a scroll or a journal. They might want to go investigate down in that pit to see what is being held. What's in here? A D20. Well, so what's the last one? The last one is, of course, loot. L. Loot is, as it sounds, the treasure that your players will receive. So you want loot rooms to usually also have that extra kind of storytelling spice, that it's not just a room full of treasure chests, that could be a reliquary, a place where ancient artifacts of magical power were stored and kept hidden from the outside world. And the fact that the players are here taking them is robbing the sacred place of its purpose, and they're essentially they're grave robbers or whatever. But same thing, yeah. If they come across coffins and pop them open, they have like gold and jewels and stuff buried with them. Like, well, it's loot, but it's also kind of a moral question. So those are the types of rooms that you can have, and those again are clues, enemies, traps, and loot. Now, I would recommend, in Theater of the Mind, don't even map out the dungeon. Just write a little summary and then an arrow pointing to whatever room this might go to this one. Because what's the point in writing a map if you're doing it Theater of the Mind? Far more evocative is just to describe it anyway, so just write descriptors, adjectives, little notes to yourself, and don't even bother. And with that, you get to make such a more interesting dungeon with things hanging from the ceiling and asymmetrical rooms that sound creepy and weird instead of just being like square boxes, right? And use those room types, and you can mix and match too, and mix them together, but use those room types to create a formula for yourself. So an easy formula for a dungeon for Theater of the Mind, like you could just write little notes to yourself. Here's an easy one. Ready? It's clue, enemy, loot. It's linear, clue, enemy, loot, but that can be portrayed in so many different ways. You walk into a cave, you see a clue of what's to come. A carcass that is ripped apart, ripped to shreds, and with a proper, perhaps animal handling check, you realize that it was done by a cave bear. So that's a clue to what's coming up. Oh, there might be cave bears here. You proceed further. What indeed there is a cave bear, and you describe that chamber and what that's like. And then, aha, loot. The cave bear's pile of dead bodies that it has stored, and amongst them the little rings and gold trinkets and other coinage and other, perhaps even a magic item that can be found. So building encounters in these terms is much more simple. It's quick. It is evocative because you can focus more on the adjectives, and it really fits the Theater of the Mind well. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on building dungeons for Theater of the Mind. I recommend giving it a try if you have typically been a map style D&D dungeon master. Give it a go. Thanks, and roll on.